Please note this podcast discusses real-life crimes and may include sensitive topics such as violence, abuse, and other disturbing content. We recommend listener discretion.
Last year they made some changes that meant Bobby's eligibility for Cat D came forward by 4 years.
So 9 years after the attempted murder of you and your unborn baby, he could be on weekend release. How does that make you feel?
I was absolutely terrified. He came up for review this year. The anxiety level's sky high. You prepare for the worst, and then the worst happened.
I'm journalist Helen Fospero.
I'm crime reporter Martin Brunt.
And this is True Criminals.
A journey into the darkest corners of the criminal underworld with insights from decades of true crime reporting.
The stories behind the stories, plus exclusive interviews with those closely involved in notorious cases.
Re-examining crimes so shocking they still haunt our imaginations.
True Criminals Insiders.
If you're following us on Patreon, thank you. And there'll be an exclusive extra chat following the main episode. A frenzied knife attack in broad daylight on a Midlands street, close to a town centre. A mother of two and her unborn baby left fighting for survival. Then the shocking discovery: the attempted murder was carried out by the victim's own partner and father of her unborn child. This is Natalie Queiroz's remarkable story as a victim of a brutal crime, and how she's turned her life around to help others.
Natalie's nightmare began on March the 4th, 2016. She walked down a street in Sutton Coldfield. Her partner, Baba Raja, known as Bobby, masked and disguised, ambushed her. He stabbed her 24 times over 9 minutes in an attempt to kill her and their unborn child. Still difficult to believe that they weren't both killed. Thanks to brave bystanders and rapid emergency help, including an air ambulance landing in the town centre, Natalie and her baby girl survived against all the odds. Before a trial could start, Raja pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 18 years in prison plus an extended 4-year licence for attempted murder and the attempted child destruction of the unborn baby. In the aftermath, Natalie endured a long physical and emotional recovery. She had sustained life-threatening injuries and nerve damage, lost a finger, suffered PTSD, and had to rebuild her life as a single mother of 3 with scars inside and out. Natalie even confronted Raja in prison as part of a restorative justice process, but that didn't work as any kind of closure. He remained evasive and controlling even in that meeting.
In the last episode, we talked to Natalie about how she survived the attack and began to rebuild her life. In this episode, we'll focus on how Natalie has turned her pain and trauma into positive action, working with offenders behind bars and campaigning against knife crime, which earned her the MBE. But there's also a dreadful and unexpected twist to the story. In 2024 and 25, Ministry of Justice policy changes, implemented quietly and under the radar, have made the man who carried out her attempted murder eligible for transfer to an open prison, and through that, potential day release 4 years earlier. He could be out on the streets without her knowledge. Natalie only discovered this rule change by chance. She's become a prominent campaigner and victims advocate in the West Midlands and is meeting MPs and ministers to push for changes to this policy when it comes to domestic violence. We'll hear from Natalie about what motivates her work and what changes she hopes to see in the system. Natalie, it's good to have you back with us on True Criminals.
Thank you for having me back.
Natalie, you had an horrific experience as a victim of a very brutal crime. You came close to losing your life, but remarkably, you've managed to use all of that to make a positive difference for others. I remember watching you walking down the steps at Birmingham Crown Court. You were hesitant, you were walking a little unsteadily, and you let the police speak for you. We didn't hear from you at that moment. But now you've got great confidence as a public speaker on various platforms. What led you to go into prison and to meet inmates, and what do you do there?
Yeah, it was an odd journey because when I first started my recovery journey, I was writing about my experiences. I was speaking as a motivational speaker type of platform. So the thought of prisons was never, ever on my radar. In fact, it couldn't be further from it. The only time I was going to go to prison in my mind was the day that I faced him, which obviously we talked about in the previous episode. So when it came to me going into prison, I started my work originally by being asked to go and speak in a pupil referral unit, a PRU. And this is where young people go and they're excluded from school, permanently excluded. And it could be for behavioural issues. Sometimes they are found carrying a weapon like a knife. And I was asked by them, can you come in and talk to our young people? They're carrying knives and we want them to know what the reality of being a stab victim is like. And that put me one step closer into that world of ending up going and speaking in prisons. So I went into there and the response was amazing. And from there, I thought I want to do more work with young people and understand youth violence and what drives youth violence. And I got myself qualified. I did a course part-time whilst also working so that I became a specialist working with gangs and youth violence. And that's when I started doing the speaking, as Helen's talked about, with knife crime campaigning and really understanding that world. And there's a young adult prison just outside Lichfield in the Midlands, and it's got 18 to 28-year-old males. And they had quite an issue with blades appearing in the prison. They can be manufactured out of anything, trust me. They're quite ingenious prisoners on what they can create a bladed article from. And they were doing what they call Keep the Peace Week. And they were having a variety of speakers coming in to talk to inmates about knife crime and its different aspects. And they said, we'd love you to come and speak in the prison and speak to the young people about what it's like to be a stab victim, so they can hear firsthand the victim's story and also the victim journey, what damage that leaves long term, and also what your physical and mental injuries are and what they're risking, not just the fact that they'll extend their sentence if they do this, but actually if they get injured or what they're doing to someone else. And I was a little bit hesitant because obviously the only time I'd been in was to face my ex-partner in restorative justice and hadn't really considered going to a prison again. And I agreed to it. And the probation officer, Paula, who's now become a really good friend of mine, very close friends, Paula was there saying, I'll be very supportive, I'll be there for you. And she was. And I remember driving up to that prison and my heart started racing because then my flashbacks of going to HMP Birmingham to face my ex came flooding back. And I thought, can I do this? Can I walk voluntarily into a prison to talk to a group of offenders? And I knew that I was going to be giving my talk in the chapel, that they were going to be bringing in all these lads. Most of them were in the age range of about 18 to 23, 24. Most of them are gang-related crimes. There's a lot of lifers, so people who've committed murder, generally gang-related murder through stabbing. And I remember walking and thinking, you are absolutely crazy, Natalie. What are you thinking? And I went in there and I gave my talk. And I remember seeing the lads coming in, they sit in the chairs. And to be fair, they were all very respectful to me. They were very shocked. I think when they saw me, they didn't expect that that was the story they were going to get, that I'd been a victim and a victim of a stabbing. I think I even put up a slide. I've had it sometimes in prisons where it says the story of my attempted murder. I think this is the title of one of the stories. And one of the lads actually said to me, Miss, have you committed attempted murder? And I was like, no, I have not. Wow. No, I'm the victim of an attempted murder. Oh, okay. And again, the response, to be fair, has been massive. For some of the inmates, it's a very uncomfortable listen because for some of them it relates very hard to maybe the crime that they committed. And I've had a few of them who have written to me subsequently saying, thank you, it was a hard listen, but you've really made me think of the outside world. Because it's a really different environment. It's literally like being in a totally different world. It's a very self-contained world. And they said we block out the outside world, and you coming in and sharing your story and what you're dealing with now made us really face up to that.
Do you think there were some that for whom it went in one ear and out the other?
Well, I have had a few of them walk out. I went to one particular prison and I had about 3 or 4 of these guys walk out, and this was actually an adult prison. And I later discovered that the reason they walked out is because they were actually all in for domestic abuse related crimes, and therefore I think it got too much. There is always going to be people that are going to sit there and not take it in, and that's true for any audience that you talk to. Everyone will take in different degrees, and you kind of always got to focus on that mantra of, well, at least if one of them, this has caused a difference, whether it's made them reflect on their crime. There's also the flip side when I talk to them is also that hope of, even if you're at your lowest point, and I always acknowledge them, I said, let's be honest, you're sat here in prison, you probably are now at your lowest point, because this is not a place that anybody would want to be. And it's trying to give them that hope that you can plan and build a life regardless, whatever side of the fence you're landing on, whether you're a victim or a perpetrator, there's always hope to come out of that dark place and find something better. Even if one of them, that message has landed, then it's been worth it. And you always take the hit. There's going to be some that refuse to listen because they don't want to, because just like victims have their own journey of recovery, offenders will also have their own journey of acceptance and openness and willingness to want to listen. So there is always going to be people that aren't going to listen. I've spoken now in 10 prisons.
All different kinds of prisons too.
Yeah, so young offenders, 16 to 18, young adult, which is 18 to 28. I've spoken in female prisons, and I've even spoken in what was going to be my kryptonite, and I swore I'd never, ever walk into one. I have spoken now in 3 adult male prisons, and that ranges from what they call Cat C prison, which is still a secure prison, everyone's locked away, right up to Cat B, which is higher security, tends to be where if you commit murder, rape, very serious offences, you tend to start off with what they call a Cat B prison. There is one level above that, which I will literally testify to this day, I am not going into a Cat A prison. That tends to be your very, very serious, maybe top of the tree, organised criminal gang networks, terrorists, etc. Not even I'm going to go down that route. But I have been into a Cat B and a Cat C male prison, but I have done female and young offenders.
It's extraordinary because some of the people in the audience, when you talk in prisons, as you say, they've killed themselves and they've killed with knives. Mm-hmm. So it's a big thing for you to go in as a victim and talk to them. And I think a very generous, spirited thing to do as well, in the hope that if a few of them listen, you can help make a difference by being the living proof of the damage that these crimes do and the ripple effect that carry on for many, many years.
Yeah, and I had it with the young adult prison that I mentioned. It was the first one I went to. I've been to a number of times now. One of my last talks there was with a group of what they call lifers, obviously people carrying a life sentence for murder. And there was only a small group of them. I did my talk. We sat and chatted quite casually afterwards, just a nice interactive conversation. And at the end of it, one of the lads actually said to me, "Miss, how do you talk to us so nicely? How do you speak to us with actual kindness, bearing in mind you've been the victim of what we've done to someone else, except the people that we did it to didn't survive?" And I said, because I have to believe, and it is true to this day, and this kind of balances out the campaigning I do now, I have to believe that a good proportion of offenders can rehabilitate, and especially when I'm in the young adult estate, this is what I'm quite passionate about when I work in the young person, because a lot of that you can see the sort of environment they've grown up in, maybe abuse they've experienced themselves, neglect, the levels of domestic abuse and neglect with some young offenders I've spoken to that they've experienced themselves and been victim of is horrendous. And it's almost a classic story, maybe they've been in care. And you think if only someone could have intervened with them before, they might not be sat here, and also their victim's family would not have lost that family member. And I say to them, I have to believe that everybody's different and that there is a chance for all of you. The driving factors for what caused Bobby Babul Raja to do what he did to me, I said, I don't believe is the driving factors for all of you sitting here.
You also co-founded a project to help people before they end up in prison. This is Inspire to Quit Blades. What does that do?
Yeah, so I have a social enterprise called Inspire to Quit Blades, I2QB. So this is about tackling youth violence with knife crime. And within that is where I actually co-developed a project with the lads at that very prison I'm talking about. Because I said to them, because a lot of them have been incarcerated at the age of 15, 16. I said, take yourself back to when you were 13 or 14. What do you think would have helped you to understand or know if someone had said that to you? So we started that as a starting point, and we developed this project. They called it Living on a Knife's Edge. It was their name. I tried to give them as much autonomy with it, that I wasn't going to guide them. They were going to shape this project. They called it Living on a Knife's Edge. To be fair as well, my suggestion was totally scorned by them. They looked at me like, yeah, old woman, like, seriously, don't want your... So I was like, okay, fair dues. Yeah, I take the feedback. And we developed this project where they discuss different themes about the reality of prison. Because in young people today, there is sometimes this belief that going to prison is cool, that it's like a badge of honour, that it's not going to be that bad, because we see these TikTok videos of people in prison jumping around, having a party, and they said literally that's for 30 seconds of when that's on. Then the phone will get confiscated, and the rest of the time you are just locked down, you are bored, you are in your cell, you might be doing some job that you would never do on the outside world, but you're doing it because it's the only way you're going to get out of your cell. And they very eloquently put that across. We got permission from the Ministry of Justice and HMPPS to film them anonymously, film them from behind. And they shared their journeys, and it filmed this series of videos, which me, as part of my organisation with I2QB, take those out then to schools and colleges and places like pupil referral units for young people to hear from other young people who have experienced what it's like. And I think, as one of the lads put, and we had it as a phrase at the beginning, he says, you think you know prison until you've been to prison, and then you really get to know prison. And he said, and I say that from experience because his dad and uncle had both been incarcerated. He said, I thought I knew prison, but actually the reality was really different when I got here.
You've reached thousands of youngsters doing this, and I know that you also tell them your story as well. But what kind of reaction do you get from these young people when you play those anonymous films of perhaps a gang member recounting what he did and what his life's been like since? How do those youngsters react? Are they quite shocked?
Do you know, it's really quite unusual. It's quite a mixed reaction. The biggest thing is that we actually have quite a reflective moment, because some of the lads on the videos will talk about what life was like before they got into a gang, or what led, because part of the question is what led you to being in a gang. And they develop an empathy. I actually had one lad who was quite gang affiliated as it came out afterwards, and he was sat very quietly and he asked to talk to me afterwards. And he said, that's me. And I was like, okay. And then safeguarding, okay, how many people know about this? There's like every safeguarding warning. But the safeguarding person was sat in with us while we were having this conversation, and they were aware of things that this person was involved in. But the reaction is actually one of deeper understanding, and the bravado soon goes, because you get some of them that are like, oh yeah, whatever, you know, and then they sit there and they go, actually, maybe this isn't what we think. So it's quite a reflective, almost at times sombre, but quite an emotional journey. We've actually opened up some quite good conversations around mental health. And what shocked me is we assume, I did, and generally as well, a lot of other teachers and things I spoke to, because we talk so openly now about mental health, we think that young people are really okay with discussing their mental health. But actually, there's one particular college I went to, we were video of this young lad talking about his mental health of being a gang member, what it was like on road and what his mental health was like in prison. And we started talking about mental health, and they said, you know what, we still don't feel comfortable talking about it. And I think the teacher was quite surprised. And so it opened up a whole debate where we never thought the conversation was going to go, about how actually a lot of young people still don't want to disclose their true mental health state, even though I think we think we're so far advanced. Actually, we're not as advanced, and young people still need a lot of support with that. So it's been very surprising, the responses and the journey.
All this advocacy has led you to being appointed the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner's Victims Advocate. That's quite a mouthful. I wrote about the West Midlands PCC, Simon Foster, recently. Mm-hmm. He was the PC who, a couple of years ago, refused to be kicked out of his job when the government wanted to replace him with a newly elected mayor. So I think I can imagine why Simon Foster would be keen to hire somebody like you to do that job. What does it involve?
Yes, and as you quite rightly say, Mr. Foster is a determined man, and he was not going to go out from the PCC under a mayoral directorate, and fair play to him. But yes, so in terms of the victims advocate, it's just a newly worded version of victims commissioner, which is sometimes a more recognised term. London, for example, is an independent victims commissioner, which was Claire Waxman. She's just become national victims commissioner. And as a victims commissioner, you are there to be the voice of the victim for the Midlands, well, for me, obviously the Midlands, because that's who I represent, in more government national platforms. So I speak to the Ministry of Justice, I'll speak to the Home Office, they'll ask for an opinion, I can reflect what's happening in the Midlands, what the true impact of that is to victims. I hold the police to account and other criminal justice agencies to make sure that victims' rights are being met. So there is a thing called the Victims Code, which is the 12 rights that every victim has. And we look at those and we see, are they being delivered? It's not just a tick box. Actually, do victims feel that that is the journey they're getting? And I sit in a monthly meeting alongside Mr Foster, the PCC, opposite the Chief Constable of West Midlands Police, and we will ask questions and hold them to account on different things. My angle is always, for example, in that case, what is the impact of police work on victims? Do victims feel they're heard? Are they supported?
And are they supported? Are they heard? Because we hear a lot about victims being at the heart of the criminal justice system, but so often they're not.
I can't disagree with you there, I'll be totally honest. Overall, in the criminal justice system, I think the whole system still has a lot of work to do. The police, to be fair, in recent years, I think especially with West Midlands, they didn't have the best rating that's very publicly known. They didn't have a good rating a few years ago. Mr Guildford obviously came in as chief and they've had to do a lot of changes and have a bigger victim focus. And they actually have been very open to working with me and looking at how better they can go, even on initiatives they've started themselves. But the criminal justice system, no, is not victim-centric. I think we're in a real worrying position that we've become more and more offender-focused and offender-supportive. And we need to redress the balance. That doesn't mean totally forgetting the rights of offenders, because everyone has their human rights. Crikey, I'm more than aware of this. If I hear that one more time, I think I might actually hit my head on a brick wall. But we have to get a balance. We have to have the victims considered greater. And I think there are a lot of times, especially with the court system, where that is not being thought of.
You know yourself that often it's offender focused, and something happened quite recently that's put this whole question of victims' rights back on your radar in a very personal and a scary way. Tell us what's happened in your situation with Bobby.
Yeah, so I talked already with this letter system, which can be very confusing, Cat A, Cat B, Cat C. And if you think of it, Cat A is the highest. As you go through the letters, it gets lower in security. And there's a thing called Cat D, and that's an open prison. And there's always a steer in the justice system that you will always try to step an offender down as they go through their sentence, eventually with the thought that hopefully they'd go into a Cat D, and that's an open prison. The way it differs is it's overall general lower security. Instead of cells, you call them rooms, for example, and they'll have a key to their own rooms. They're not locked up behind a door where they can't get out. They can come and go from their room as they like.
Sort of preparing them for life back on the outside once their sentence is done.
Think of, no offence, Butlins or Haven or anyone else, but think of like Butlins, but with a guard on the gate. A bit like that, because they got that freedom and movement. It's trying to be like a hybrid environment, I guess. So you still have obviously a security where you're within the prison walls, but then with Cat D comes what they call day release, and they call it release on temporary licence, ROTL, ROTL. And prisoners can earn this ability to go out of the prison unaccompanied, and they can get a job. They can even drive a car. They could have a car sitting in the car park of the prison to go and drive to a place of work and drive back again. And as long as they come back at night, and that's a discussion point on its own because they don't always come back at night, as we well know. In recent news, prisoners disappear in all sorts of circumstances at the moment.
Not tagged.
Not tagged, no, and they can do a Houdini and they're gone. Really, the thinking behind Cat D, when it first was to be that when somebody was coming for parole, so parole assessment, it's their early release. Bobby's case, this was the 12-year mark, as we know, that Cat D is there as an option. So if they come in front of the parole board and the parole board goes, you know what, we're not sure whether you're going to be right for the outside world, therefore we'll put you into a Cat D. We can try you out in this more open conditions, hybrid environment, and then we can assess you in 12 months, and if you're good to go kind of thing. From talking to prison officers, that was the initial thinking behind a Cat D. As it is now, because of our prison capacity problems, the ability to access open prison earlier than ever expected before has changed. So we are now at the point that offenders can move to an open prison up to 5 years before their parole eligibility, which is huge, huge. And that in itself brings a lot of risk to other inmates within Cat D, because you've got people who could be sitting in an open prison for 5 years, which is a big trust thing, because generally people would go there at the very end of their sentence. It's a harder thing for prison governors, and they've come out and said they're worried about the risk management of people being in Cat D for that long. Because really, are they at that point of being ready to be in an open prison environment?
But what does it mean for you, Natalie?
What it means for me is that last year they made some changes that meant that Bobby's eligibility for Cat D came forward by 4 years. So I was told he, in simple terms, shouldn't have been eligible till the 13-year mark to go to open prison. And the reason being because you had to be within 5 years of your release date. Conservatives, before they went out of power, so this is both parties, so it's not party political, because actually they're both added to this. Conservatives, before they went out of power, removed that need to be within 5 years of your release date. And they said, no, you just be 3 years before parole eligibility. So that 13-year mark where Bob had to be in closed conditions for until he could go to open 5 years before his release date, which we know is the 18-year mark, suddenly jumped forwards, and it jumped forwards to the 9-year mark, that he was eligible at 9 years, not 13.
So 9 years after the attempted murder of you and your unborn baby, he could be on weekend release or driving a car. How does that make you feel, Natalie? I know you're a very strong woman, but that sounds very frightening to me.
I was absolutely terrified. So I learned about it last year. I started campaigning. I met with various ministers, MPs, and the most frustrating part was that they all agreed with me that it sounded risky. He came up for review this year. They reviewed him in July of this year. It took best part of 3 months to get an outcome, which was horrendous waiting. Every day, checking my email. The anxiety levels sky high, thinking any minute now I'm going to get this email, and you prepare for the worst. And then the worst happened, which is I get the email to tell me that he has been granted his Cat D. And I remember exactly, I'd just come off a Teams call with work. Luckily, I was at home. I saw it flash up. You have what they call a victim liaison officer, who's your contact throughout, who gives you updates about parole, etc., and movement if they get downgraded. And she emailed me, and I saw her name flash up on my phone. And it's one of those awful things. I was thinking, Natalie, wait till the end of your work day before you open that. But you can't, because when you know it's there. And I read it and I just burst into tears. I phoned my husband. He came home straight away, and I was absolutely beside myself. It took all the air out of me. I got so bad with the news that I questioned why I did any of what I did. I questioned what was the point, that I'd put such a strong case. I'd had so many people on my side. I'd talked to so many ministers and MPs. And I thought, what's the point? Because if I can do all of that and he still gets it, why am I doing this? I questioned why I did the victims advocate, victims commissioner role. I was like, well, voice clearly doesn't count for anything. And I went through all of that in my head, that whole self-doubt. It was almost like putting me back to day one of recovery after the attack. That's a great way to put it.
You thought you wouldn't have to worry about the possibility of his release until 2029, but you can't challenge this move to an open prison.
Theoretically, no, you can't challenge it. But being me, Martin, that doesn't stop me. What's the theory and what I actually do are two completely different things.
Well, when he comes up for parole, you can challenge that, can't you? You're asked as a victim to give the parole board your thoughts and concerns, but you can't do it at the moment, as the law stands, for a move to an open prison. But your case has become a rallying point over this issue, hasn't it? And you've taken on the government. Mm-hmm. So what has the Ministry of Justice said to you starting perhaps another campaign to give victims like you a say in a move to an open prison?
I've managed to get them to move eventually, because I kept saying exactly the point you've raised, that when it comes to parole board, you're allowed as a victim to put in how you feel the risk is to yourself. And you were never allowed to do that when it came to about Cat D. They have changed it this year that you can now. So that's been a small win, that victims can now put in a risk assessment. I'll be totally honest, how much that's actually looked at, listened to, who knows, but it was a small win. that obviously did not stop my campaigning, because my campaign has been very clear to the Ministry of Justice that I said, well, for domestic abuse offenders and for stalkers as well, who have targeted victims, that they should not be allowed to go to open prison early. So I am currently in a bit of a headlock with Ministry of Justice over it. They probably think as soon as they see my name come up again, oh my gosh, it's her. And it's weird because obviously I talk to them in my professional career as well as my personal campaigning. So they get me double time. And where we stand now is the Ministry of Justice will hold their position that they risk assess every single offender. That will be this line that they would give, that nobody's transferred if they don't feel that the risk is minimal. I don't believe that for a second. That's nonsense. We know that the prisons are full. We know that we have a population issue, and we do have a population crisis. That isn't made up. There is a population crisis. However, very lucky for me, as part of my campaigning, going very public about Bobby getting his Cat D, I had support from two very big news agencies, obviously BBC News and Sky News. And through that, they interviewed the Prison Governors Association, a representative of the prison governors. And I was so pleased to hear at last somebody say it very publicly, because I'd heard it said in all of my working life, but that was from them talking to me, prison governors. But the Prison Governors Association came forward and said, this is risky. The public are being put at risk. We are seeing prisoners coming into Cat D, into open prison, who we wouldn't have seen 2 years ago, and that the prison population pressures are driving this. And so at last, there was a point of it not just being me as a victim saying, this is risky, and especially when you're considering where you've got targeted victims with domestic abuse and stalkers, I've got the backing of Prison Governors Association. So the conversation is ongoing. I know they won't do a blanket reversal, because the hard and fast reality is they can't, because they have to relieve prison population pressures. And that's why I've gone for a subset of people, prisoners, as I say, where there is a targeted victim on the outside world who we need to protect. And that's why I've said they should not be transferred early, maximum 12 months before parole eligibility. So they have 12 months of this hybrid living before they go to parole. So that ticks the box of you can test them out. That's the stance. I'm hoping to meet with Mr. Lammy soon. David Lammy has agreed to see me after a question was posed to him in the House of Commons by an MP about my case.
How long might that take? He's a busy man.
Well, it's taken 3 weeks so far, Martin. I still don't have a date. So I'm hoping by the time this has gone out, this is me being really optimistic, that Santa will bring me an appointment with Mr. Lammy.
There's a number of people who that's on their Santa wish list, an appointment with Mr. Lammy, but he's been all over the place for various reasons.
Maybe I should seek out a department store with a Santa and see if I can make a wish.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Exactly. I'm just wondering what impact it's had on your family. I mean, this is a man who clearly tried to kill you and your unborn baby and stabbed you 24 times with a knife. And it's 9 years that he's been behind bars now. How has it affected the family? Have you had to become super vigilant? And has it brought back feelings of fear for you, Natalie, knowing that in the next however many months or year or so, unbeknown to you, he could actually be out on the streets enjoying his day release?
Yeah, and for my family, it's such a key point, because I think we sometimes forget this, because we can focus on myself where it's obvious where the impact is. But it's really important to acknowledge the wider impact on my family. Telling my two older daughters, my eldest has now just turned 20, my other daughter's 16. As I say, they were 6.5 and 10.5 when it happened. And it was horrendous. It was horrendous to tell them that the man who tried to murder your mum and little sister is going to open prison. And it was absolutely devastating news for them. My eldest is at university, so I had to tell her on the phone, even worse. But I wanted her to know before it broke publicly. She held it together completely on the phone. She has recently told me she did cry that night. She said, I didn't want to tell you, Mum, because they're always trying, bless them, to protect me. The little one is still fairly oblivious. She knows things are going on. She's quite clingy to me. I've noticed she's my shadow anyway, but she's probably got a bit clingier. But my middle daughter, who's sitting at GCSE mocks, yes, that's going to add pressure to her regardless of the mocks, but her anxiety has really increased, and we're having to look to get support for her anxiety, because it brings it home for all of us that he could be out.
Do you think, apart from the anxiety, which I think a lot of people will understand, do you think he's going to come out of prison looking for revenge?
I think my biggest concern is, I know that there's still a potential fixation there. And I know that through prison work I've done, and I've come across offenders who've met him and been close to him, and they've relayed some tales that are alarming about how he has actually spoken about me, that they didn't realise that I was his victim. So whether that fixation is still there, I think what you got to remember is it's such a self-contained world. It's almost like time is suspended when you're in prison. And this is always the issue with domestic abusers and stalkers, is they don't necessarily move on mentally because they're stuck in a time period. Whether his fixation would be me, my biggest concern is my daughter, him seeking her out. When I faced him in prison, bearing in mind he admits he tried to kill her and pleaded guilty to trying to murder her. He thanked me when I was in prison for bringing up his daughter, as he called it. He goes, "Thank you for bringing up my daughter." And I went, whoa. First of all, you don't need to thank me. I'm her mom. And as a parent, that's what you do. You protect your child. And I very pointedly said, you don't try to kill them. Then I said, best case scenario, our daughter, reality, mine. I'm worried that if that fixation hasn't moved on about her safety, and it'll be a lifelong thing. Martin, if I'm honest, I'm going to be protecting my daughter till my dying breath to make sure that she's safe and that she's secure and protected.
Because he's going to come out sometime.
He will, yeah. And that is the reality of life. He will come out. He's on a determinate sentence. There's a fixed term of when he'll come out. 18 years, he will come out. Reality, especially as we are with current prison environment, he'll come out at 12. And the way prisons are going at the moment, crikey, could pop out any time because they seem to let anyone go. But that's a very political, controversial point.
It's funny, isn't it? You know, you talk about him serving a set number of years and we know how long the maximum could be. He sentenced you to a life sentence because he sentenced you really, Natalie, to a life of anxiety and fear, even though you manage it very, very well and you've channeled it into doing extraordinary things that have actually earned you the MBE. You've gone over and above to help other people and help youngsters avoid that kind of life of crime, talk to people who are in prison and help them understand the impact. But this is a life sentence for you, I think.
It is. And you know what the nice thing is? In the prison, the offenders that I've spoken to, they even came to that realisation, and they'll say to me, "Miss, you've got to live with this, haven't you, for the rest of your life?" And I say to them, yeah. For those of them who have life sentences who I talk to, I say, you are in prison, you are serving a sentence, and when you are serving a life sentence, which we know doesn't mean they'll be in for their whole life, but they'll be monitored for their life. I said, but I have my own life sentence because until I literally take my last breath on this earth, it will always affect me because there'll always be something I need to keep vigilant about.
One thing I think that really highlights how we talk about the fact that victims are often forgotten in this and that offenders are perhaps prioritised sometimes in the justice system is the fact that there's no routine exclusion zone. So rather than being excluded from an area like, for example, Bristol, which gives the offender information on where their victim is, shouldn't it be the offender that has his or her movement limited?
Yeah, and they are looking at that. They are bringing in a restriction zone. The Ministry of Justice, to be fair and balanced to them, they are introducing the notion of a restriction zone for that very reason, that exclusion zones, which is always how they've worked it out, a victim will sit there and they'll say, right, I don't want the offender in this area or that area. For example, as you say, I don't want them in Bristol or I don't want them in Birmingham, for argument's sake. Say, though, that I moved to Cornwall. I would have my exclusion zone in Cornwall, which obviously then straight away gives away, well, clearly she lives in Cornwall. So they're saying for violent offenders and violent sexual offenders, but the government haven't defined what that actually means. I was in a meeting with the MOJ yesterday, asked what is the criteria, and they said we're still working through it. An offender will be restricted, as you say, to a particular area. So you might be able to say you're restricted to Gloucestershire, for argument's sake. Apologies to anyone in Gloucestershire, because every time I use this as an example, I don't know why Gloucestershire comes up. I have nothing against Gloucestershire, by the way, very beautiful part of the world. But you could say, I want him only in there. And the great thing for a victim is it means that if I travel anywhere in the UK, I know that I can't come across him because he's within a certain zone. And if I decide to go through Gloucestershire, for argument's sake in this example, then I know I'm putting myself under the risk that I might see him run into him or whatever. And obviously when they're trying to monitor somebody on tag, because obviously they'd have to use a tagging system to go with this, that they would tag them and they would know that if that tag went out the periphery of that boundary, that they've breached. So restriction zones on paper sound brilliant. That sounded really cynical, didn't it? I'm hoping they, in reality, are as effective as they are, but we don't know how long. For example, somebody would have a restriction zone imposed on them, because again, that goes back to Martin's point, it wouldn't be for life, it'd be for a number of years.
You've been through, by anybody's measure, extreme trauma. I just wondered what you've learned from your experience about how to survive that trauma.
I think the biggest thing I've learned is just keep focused on one goal ahead, whatever that is. So at the beginning for me, it was keep getting up every single day and being a mum and functioning for my 3 children. If you'd said to me at the beginning, well, you're going to be going and meeting with all these ministers and you're going to go into Parliament and you're going to do this, I'd have gone, absolutely get away. I have trouble going to the co-op. It's a stepwise journey. It's not a linear journey. That's the other thing. You know, when you hear these stories of recovery and it sounds like someone's gone from 0 to hero, like, oh, I was really bad and now I'm doing this. But the journey, it's like going over a set of bumpy hills. You'll have your ups, you'll have your downs. And just as I was explaining to Helen when it came through that he got his open prison, I hit a bit of a low point mentally because it took me back down and made me question myself, and I'm back up again now. And that's the key thing. Have your focus, whatever that focus is, and don't make it too far ahead. Just make it clear and relatable to where you are at that point of your journey. And 2, don't be hard on yourself if you don't think you're always on the up, because there are always downs that come along the way, but you will go back up again.
You met some of those heroes that intervened, haven't you?
I have, actually. I've literally spoken to 2 of them within this last week. I'm going out to dinner with Tony and his wife, and I'll be meeting with Callum, who was 18 and is now, crikey, he must be, 27? Oh, my days.
What was it like meeting up the first time you saw them and you were able to presumably thank them for intervening and helping?
A lot of tears, and it's always been in a really public place as well, so people must be going, why are those people hugging and crying? I mean, I suppose luckily in my local area the story's fairly well known, so they can relate. Really, really emotional, because we've got a bond, and I was saying this to Callum actually the other day. We shared an experience that, although other people can appreciate it, we are the only people who can understand it because we were there during it. So it's a lifelong bond and understanding that will never go.
And something they've had to cope with too. That's all part of the ripple effect of what you went through. It's not just you, it's not just your family. Presumably they deal with some very horrific memories from that
all
day.
3 of them, it definitely impacted. And I know it has impacted all 3 of them in totally different ways. And they had to go through quite a journey of understanding, and they will always have that, because at the end of the day they were faced with an unimaginable circumstance which they very bravely ran into. They dealt on their instinct because of this superhuman inner kindness that was within them, that they put themselves on the line for a stranger. But it's a traumatic situation for them, and that should never be forgotten as well.
Natalie, you've been incredible. Your story is, as we said at the outset, harrowing. But the way you talk about it and the way you describe how you've used it as a force for good is incredibly uplifting. So thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Thank you both of you for having me today and for speaking to you once more.
Keep in touch, Natalie, and we wish you best of luck with everything you're doing, and particularly in the House of Parliament right now. Keep on going. Martin, there's so much in Natalie's story, so much to talk about. But one thing that struck me in the second episode is the whole question of domestic violence. And Natalie's story, I think, shows how important it is to look out for those red flags of controlling relationships before they escalate to violence.
But in Natalie's case, there really weren't any red flags. I know Natalie has told us that if she looks back, perhaps there was some evidence of coercive control, but nothing more than that. There was nothing to warn her. If Raja was under direct family pressure to end the relationship, why on earth did he think that murder was the answer to it? Natalie wasn't the victim of domestic violence. He had no prior convictions. Outwardly, he was a respectable professional. It is an absolutely horrifying story. But hearing how Natalie has responded, going out to talk to young people and even perpetrators, that's the sort of thing that might stop the next Raja. But bear in mind that the picture of knife crime in the UK is still very bleak. It might have statistically fallen, 5% last year, but knife crime figures in this country are still way above what they were 10 years ago.
I think what's also shocking is how Natalie accidentally learned about a major policy shift that really does affect her safety. Is there a failure in communication between the system and victims of crime?
Well, there clearly is, and we keep saying this, don't we, that there is this mantra within the criminal justice system that victims are going to be at the heart of it. We've discussed it with Natalie, and she says that clearly there are many, many occasions when that doesn't happen. I'm sure it does happen from time to time, and I've certainly seen the development of the use of victim impact statements in court, which was a big move forward, and some of them can be absolutely heartbreaking. And I've heard where judges have listened to them, and it has directly affected the sentence that they've delivered at the end of it. But clearly victims shouldn't be left in the dark. And I'm sure we're going to see a lot more debate around this point about excluding domestic abusers from early release. I think we've got enough flavour of what Natalie's about to know that she is going to continue with those kind of campaigns. On the positive side, the creation of roles like victims advocate means that police and prisons are increasingly aware of victims' rights and concerns. And of course, in that role that Natalie's taken on, she's not coming at it as a detached bureaucrat, but as somebody who truly knows the stakes. You just hope that when she does go into battle for victims, that those she's talking to, Chief Constable, the Police and Crime Commissioner, the two people that she meets on a regular basis, you just hope that they are listening and are in a position to make the changes that she's advocating.
Thank goodness Natalie is a bit of a one-off. I think she's a force to be reckoned with. And I think Natalie will always make sure that her voice is heard, not just for herself. In fact, not for herself, probably, because the care that she has and thought for other people and wanting to help other people. It really moves me how, having read Natalie's book, which was all about the first year after the attack, now seeing her, she's refused to be defined as a victim and instead chosen to work with gang members in prisons, become an educator, a campaigner, an advocate, and really use this to fight for others.
Yeah, it's astonishing and it's uplifting, isn't it? I've said that before, how Natalie has turned her experience, terrible experience, into a force for good. That can't have been easy to begin with. And I reflected on watching her at the end of Raja's sentence, walking down the steps at Birmingham Crown Court with police officers, and perhaps at that stage not feeling confident enough to talk in the way that she can do now. As we've heard, she's an articulate and passionate campaigner for change.
Welcome to our new Patreon followers. Thank you for joining. Just to remind listeners, if you want to hear the episodes ad-free, you can. Head over to patreon.com/True Criminals. Stay with us for 3 months at Patreon and we'll send you a free True Criminals mug. Martin and I haven't even got one of those yet. Your support means everything to us. If you're enjoying the podcast, please take a moment to leave us a review. It helps us grow, reach new listeners, and keep bringing you the stories you love. This episode is brought to you by Audio Bleach Global. Our producer is Russell Barnes, with audio production by Andrew Chappell. The original score was composed by Chap Mannequin, artwork by Bleached, executive produced by Lee Mann. Follow True Criminals on Instagram at true.criminals and on YouTube at youtube.com/@true-criminals. For exclusive content and ways to support the show, visit us at patreon.com/True Criminals. For partnership opportunities, please contact us at contact@audiobleachglobal.com.